The summer night air clung to Serena's skin as she exited the theater, a satisfied smile playing across her lips. The film, a powerful drama about a black female mathematician overcoming institutional barriers in the 1960s, had resonated deeply. As the crowd dispersed into the warm evening, Serena declined her driver's text. The night was pleasant, and her apartment was only 15 blocks away through the heart of Greenwich Village. A walk would do her good, help her process the emotional resonance of the film. "Ms. Williams?" The theater manager had appeared at her elbow, voice hushed with reverence. "Would you like us to call you a car? Or perhaps use our private exit?" Serena smiled, appreciating the concern but craving normalcy. "Thank you, but I'm fine. Just going to enjoy the evening air." The manager nodded, understanding but concerned. "Of course. Have a wonderful evening." As Serena stepped onto the sidewalk, the manager's protective instinct reminded her of her father, Richard. His vigilance had been both shield and preparation, always warning his daughters about a world that might not welcome their greatness. Those lessons had shaped her, though she'd spent years finding the balance between her father's protective paranoia and her own determination to move through the world unafraid. The village streets were quieter than usual for a Thursday in June. Street lamps cast long shadows across the sidewalk as Serena pulled her lightweight jacket closer, not from cold, but from habit. Despite her worldwide recognition and the fortune she'd amassed through years of dominance on the tennis court, she still cherished these moments of anonymity. Just another New Yorker, walking home after a movie. Her phone buzzed. A text from Venus. Landed safely in London. Weather perfect for practice tomorrow. You sure you don't want to defend your Wimbledon doubles title one last time? Serena smiled. Her sister never stopped trying, even though they'd agreed Serena's competitive days were behind her. Now her focus was on her venture capital firm, her clothing line, and most importantly, her daughter, Olympia. Still, Venus's invitation triggered a familiar flutter of competitive excitement. There was nothing like the grass courts of Wimbledon, nothing like standing shoulder to shoulder with her sister against the world. "Already packed your favorite doubles outfit, just in case you change your mind," Venus added. Serena chuckled, typing back, "Focus on your singles, V. I'm enjoying civilian life." As she slipped her phone back into her pocket, Serena became aware of footsteps behind her. Casual at first, maintaining distance. Nothing unusual for the city, yet something felt off. The footsteps multiplied. 2 sets, then 3. Their rhythm changed, or more purposeful now. Her instincts, honed through decades of competitive sport, heightened her awareness. Without turning around, she subtly increased her pace. "Hey, isn't that the tennis player?" A male voice called out, loud enough to ensure she heard it. Serena didn't respond, continuing her steady stride. A crosswalk loomed ahead. Red light. She paused, weighing her options. "I'm talking to you," the voice grew closer. "What are you doing in this neighborhood anyway?" Taking a measured breath, Serena turned to face 3 men in their 20s, wearing matching navy windbreakers emblazoned with a circular logo she didn't recognize. Their expressions conveyed a mixture of recognition and something darker. "Just heading home after a movie," she replied, voice steady. "Having a nice evening." The tallest of the 3 stepped forward. "Well, well, the great Serena Williams. Not so intimidating without a racket, are you?" "I'm not looking for trouble," Serena stated calmly, glancing around. The street had emptied. A convenience store stood half a block away, its lights a beacon of potential safety. "Neither are we," said the second man, shorter but broader. "We're just curious why someone like you thinks you belong in this part of town." Serena recognized the coded language immediately. 15 years of international travel had exposed her to every shade of prejudice, from subtle microaggressions to blatant hostility. This wasn't her first encounter with racism, and something told her it wouldn't be her last. "This part of town?" she echoed, maintaining eye contact. "I wasn't aware Greenwich Village had restrictions." The traffic light changed, but Serena remained where she stood. Running would only escalate the situation. Years of press conferences had taught her to control narratives, to redirect uncomfortable questions. "You know what we mean," said the third man, previously silent. "People should stick to their own communities." A car drove past, slowing momentarily before continuing on. Serena catalogued it mentally. A burgundy sedan, possibly a witness if needed later. "I find that perspective interesting," Serena replied, her voice taking on the measured tone she used for post-match interviews after controversial calls. Especially considering the history of this neighborhood as a melting pot of cultures and ideas. The tallest man stepped closer. "Don't lecture us about history. You athletes think your success makes you special, exempt from the natural order." Serena smiled slightly. "Natural order? That's fascinating terminology. Would you elaborate on what you mean by that?" The unexpected question temporarily threw him off balance. Serena recognized the technique from her most challenging matches. When overwhelmed, change the rhythm. Force your opponent to adapt to your pace. "Don't play dumb," he growled, regaining composure. "You know exactly what I mean." "Actually, I don't," Serena countered, taking a calculated half-step backward toward the convenience store. "But I'm genuinely curious about your worldview. It must be exhausting, categorizing everyone you meet into such rigid boxes." The second man laughed humorlessly. "You're trying to psychoanalyze us? Classic deflection." A police cruiser turned onto the street, its headlights illuminating the four of them. The men grew visibly tense. Serena remained still, expression neutral. The cruiser continued past without slowing. Once it disappeared around the corner, the men seemed to gain renewed confidence. "Let's cut the philosophical debate," said the tall one. "We've been watching you, following your career, your attitude on the court, your so-called dominance. Some of us think you've been given special treatment." Serena's mind flashed to the countless double standards she'd faced throughout her career. The criticism of her expressions of frustration when male players were celebrated for the same passion. The scrutiny of her outfits. The drug tests at frequencies her peers never experienced. "Special treatment," she repeated slowly. "That's certainly one interpretation of my experience." Her hand slipped into her pocket, finding her phone. Without looking, she pressed the emergency SOS button, a habit her security team had drilled into her. 3 taps. Location services automatically activated. "You know what's interesting about tennis?" Serena continued, voice steady. "It's one of the few sports where the rules are absolutely clear. The ball is either in or it's out. No subjective judgments required." She took another step backward. The convenience store was now just 30 feet away. "Life should be the same way," said the third man. "Clear boundaries, clear divisions." "What a limited perspective," Serena replied. "The beauty of life comes from its complexity, not its simplicity." The tall man's face darkened. "Enough talk. We didn't approach you for a philosophical discussion." "Then why did you approach me?" Serena asked directly. "What exactly do you want?" The question hung in the air. For a moment, uncertainty flickered across their faces. Serena recognized the hesitation. The moment when an opponent realizes they've been drawn into a game they didn't plan to play. "We want you to understand your place," the tall one finally said, though his voice carried less conviction than before. Serena nodded thoughtfully. "My place? Interesting concept. 23 Grand Slam singles titles suggest my place is among the greatest athletes in history. But perhaps you're referring to something else?" Before any of them could respond, the convenience store door opened, releasing a group of late-night customers, 5 college-aged students, laughing loudly. The dynamic of the street instantly changed. The 3 men exchanged glances. The calculus had shifted. "This conversation isn't over," muttered the tall one. "Actually, I think it is," Serena replied. "But I appreciate the opportunity to exchange perspectives." As she turned to walk away, the second man called after her. "You think you're so clever. You're still not welcome here." Serena paused, then turned back. "You know what separates champions from everyone else? It's not talent. It's not even hard work, though that's essential. It's the ability to face the same prejudices, the same obstacles, the same hatred year after year, and still show up the next day, ready to compete." She took a step toward them, and surprisingly, they retreated slightly. "I've been told I don't belong on tennis courts around the world. I've been told my style, my appearance, my very existence doesn't fit the mold of what a champion should be. And yet, history will remember my name, while people who define themselves by hatred remain footnotes at best." The group of students had noticed the confrontation and had slowed their pace, watching with curiosity. "You have a choice," Serena continued. "You can spend your energy trying to maintain imaginary boundaries, or you can challenge yourselves to expand your worldview. One path leads to growth, the other leads to obsolescence." The tall man's expression flickered between anger and uncertainty. "You don't understand the real world." Serena laughed genuinely. "I've competed in 33 countries across 6 continents. I've experienced adoration and discrimination in equal measure. I understand the real world better than most." The sound of approaching sirens grew in the distance. Someone, perhaps the students, perhaps another bystander, had called the police. "This isn't over," the tall man said, backing away. "It never is," Serena replied. "That's the point. Progress isn't a destination, it's a continuous journey." As the 3 men retreated into the shadows of a side street, the group of students approached Serena. "Was that really Serena Williams?" one of them whispered loudly to another. "Are you okay?" asked a young woman with concern. "Those guys looked troublesome." Serena smiled. "I'm fine, thank you. Just an interesting philosophical disagreement." As the police car rounded the corner, Serena made a quick decision. She didn't want to spend hours filing reports and answering questions. She didn't want this encounter to define her evening. "Everything's fine, officer," she called out, as the cruiser slowed beside them, "just catching up with some fans." The officer looked skeptical but nodded. "You sure, ma'am?" "Positive," Serena replied confidently. "Thank you for checking." As the police car pulled away, one of the students asked hesitantly, "Can I ask why you didn't tell them what really happened?" Serena considered the question carefully. "Because some battles are worth fighting in the moment, and others are better fought through living well and changing mindsets over time." She glanced in the direction the 3 men had disappeared. "They wanted to make me feel small, unwelcome, afraid. Reporting them might satisfy a desire for immediate justice, but it wouldn't address the root of their prejudice." "So they just get away with it?" another student asked, incredulous. They leave this encounter unchanged, Serena corrected. I walk away with my dignity intact, having refused to be diminished by their worldview. In my experience, that's not getting away with it. Ow. That's failing to achieve their objective. What Serena didn't verbalize was the exhaustion, the constant calculation, the energy required to navigate these situations with composure, when what she really wanted was to express the full range of her justified anger. But years in the public eye had taught her which battles to fight publicly and which to process privately. As the students introduced themselves, Margaret, Zach, Tyler, Aisha, and Gina, Serena felt her phone vibrate again, her security team responding to the SOS signal. She quickly texted back that she was safe, crisis averted. No need for intervention. "Would you mind if we walked with you?" asked Margaret, the young woman who'd first expressed concern. Safety in numbers and all that. Serena smiled. "I'd appreciate the company." As they walked, Serena found herself enjoying the students' easy conversation. They were New York University students, 2 studying film, 1 in pre-med, 2 in computer science. Their enthusiastic discussion about their futures reminded Serena of her own early days, when possibilities seemed both endless and terrifyingly specific. "I still can't believe this," Zach said, sneaking glances at Serena. "I watched you win the Australian Open when I was 10. You're the reason I started playing tennis." Serena smiled. "Still playing?" "Club level at NYU," he admitted. "Nothing special, but I love it." "That's what matters," Serena replied, "loving the game." As they turned onto a tree-lined street, Serena's mind drifted back to her first major encounter with racism in tennis. Indian Wells, 2001. The booing that had rained down as she walked onto the court, the accusations of match-fixing when Venus withdrew from their semifinal match, their father Richard claiming he'd heard racial slurs from the crowd. She'd boycotted the tournament for 14 years afterward. When she finally returned in 2015, it had been a conscious choice, a decision to reclaim space rather than cede it permanently. "Ms. Williams?" Aisha's voice pulled her back to the present. "Can I ask you something personal?" Serena nodded, curious. "How do you handle it? When people try to diminish your accomplishments because of who you are?" The question hung in the air, weighty and familiar. Serena had been asked variations of this hundreds of times. By young players, by journalists, by friends. Her answer had evolved over years, shaped by experience and reflection. "I remember who I am," Serena said finally, "not who they say I am." There's power in that distinction. Before Aisha could respond, they all became aware of footsteps behind them. Turning, Serena recognized the 3 men from earlier, now joined by 2 others. They maintained distance, but were clearly following. "They're still following us," Tyler whispered, alarmed. "Just keep walking," Serena replied calmly. "We're almost to my building." But as they reached the next intersection, 3 more figures emerged from a side street ahead. Serena recognized the coordinated positioning. She was being surrounded. The students drew closer to her, sensing the threat. "What do we do?" Jin whispered, voice tight with anxiety. Serena assessed their options. They were 2 blocks from her building, but the path forward was now blocked. Retreat wasn't viable with the original group behind them. Across the street stood a 24-hour diner, lights blazing, people visible inside. "When I say now, we're going to cross to that diner," Serena instructed quietly. "Stay together. Don't run, but move purposefully." The students nodded, tension evident in their postures. "Now." Serena led them across the street, maintaining a confident stride. From the corner of her eye, she saw the men adjusting their course to intercept. The tall leader called out, "Running away, champion! That's not very sporting of you." Serena ignored him, guiding the students toward the diner's entrance. They were halfway across the street when the leader stepped directly into their path. "We weren't finished with our conversation," he said, blocking their progress. Serena stepped forward, placing herself between the man and the students. "I believe we were. Please step aside." "Or what?" he challenged. "You'll serve an ace at me?" Behind him, his companions had formed a loose semicircle. Their body language communicated clear intimidation. The logo on their windbreakers was now clearly visible, a circular emblem with a stylized torch. "I recognize that symbol," Margaret whispered to Serena. "They're from that new nationalist group, Heritage Defenders. They've been recruiting on college campuses." Serena nodded slightly, keeping her focus on the leader. "What's your name?" she asked calmly. The question seemed to surprise him. "What?" "Your name," Serena repeated. "If we're going to have a meaningful conversation, I should know what to call you." He hesitated, then answered, "Eric." "Eric," Serena echoed. "I'm Serena, though you already knew that. These are Margaret, Zach, Tyler, Aisha, and Jin. Now we've all been introduced." The personalization strategy momentarily disrupted the group dynamic. Several of Eric's companions shifted uncomfortably. "This isn't a social call," Eric said, regaining his hostility. "No," Serena agreed. "It appears to be an attempt at intimidation. The question is, to what end?" Inside the diner, a waitress had noticed the confrontation. She was on the phone, presumably calling the police. Serena needed to buy time. "You represent everything wrong with modern America," Eric said, voice rising. "Unearned success, preferential treatment, the destruction of tradition." "That's quite a list of grievances," Serena interrupted calmly. "Perhaps we could discuss them over coffee." She gestured toward the diner. "I'm genuinely interested in understanding your perspective." The unexpected invitation created visible confusion among the group. This wasn't how their intimidation was supposed to work. "You're mocking us," Eric accused. "Not at all," Serena replied. "I'm offering to listen. Isn't that what you want? For someone like me to hear your concerns?" From the corner of her eye, Serena could see two police cruisers turning onto the street, lights flashing but sirens silent. The diner waitress had acted quickly. Eric noticed too. His expression hardened. "This isn't over, Williams." "That's the second time you've said that tonight," Serena observed. "Yet here we are, still talking. Perhaps what you really want isn't confrontation, but conversation." Eric backed away as the police cruisers stopped nearby. His companions had already begun dispersing into side streets. "Next time you won't have protection," he warned before turning to leave. "There doesn't need to be a next time, Eric," Serena called after him. "There are better ways to address whatever's really bothering you." As two officers approached, Serena turned to the shaken students. "Are you all okay?" They nodded, though their faces showed the strain of the encounter. "Ms. Williams?" One officer approached. "Is there a problem here?" Serena weighed her options. Filing a report would mean hours of statements, possible media attention, and giving these men exactly what they wanted: disruption and notoriety. "Just a disagreement that's been resolved," she replied. "But these students could use a police escort back to their campus, if possible." The officer nodded, though his expression remained skeptical. "And you, ma'am?" "My building is just around the corner. I'll be fine." After ensuring the students were safely in police custody, Serena continued toward her apartment. The encounter had left her with a familiar heaviness, the weight of representing not just herself, but carrying the projections and prejudices of others. As she reached her building, the doorman rushed to open the door, concern evident in his face. "Ms. Williams, are you all right? There was some commotion down the street." "I'm fine, Jerome. Thank you." Inside her apartment, Serena finally allowed herself to process the emotions she'd carefully controlled during the confrontation. Anger, frustration, a bone-deep weariness with having to navigate these waters decades into the 21st century. She poured herself a glass of water and moved to the window, looking out at the city lights. Her phone buzzed with a text from Venus. "You awake? Call me." Instead of calling, Serena found herself opening her laptop. She searched Heritage Defenders, curious about the group that had targeted her tonight. The results painted a disturbing picture: a growing nationalist organization with chapters in 12 states, presenting themselves as defenders of traditional American values while espousing barely veiled white supremacist ideologies. Their website featured slick graphics and carefully worded manifestos that stayed just within the bounds of legal speech. Their membership was growing, particularly among young white men in urban areas feeling economically and culturally displaced. What struck Serena most was the sophistication of their approach. This wasn't the crude racism of previous generations, but something more insidious. Racism dressed in intellectual clothing, designed to appeal to those seeking simple explanations for complex social changes. As she scrolled through their materials, Serena spotted a familiar face: Eric, the leader from tonight's confrontation. He was featured in a video titled "The Illusion of Merit," arguing that certain minority groups received preferential treatment in sports, education, and business. Seeing him in this context crystallized something for Serena. Tonight's encounter hadn't been random. She had been specifically targeted as a symbol of her success, representing everything their worldview rejected. The realization should have been frightening. Instead, Serena felt a strange clarity. If she represented a challenge to their narrative, then her continued success and visibility were themselves forms of resistance. Her phone rang were Venus calling rather than texting. Serena answered, her sister's familiar voice in immediate comfort. "Hey, 5. Finally! I've been texting you for hours. How was the movie?" Serena hesitated, unsure whether to share the night's events. Venus had always been protective, quick to righteous anger when anyone threatened her sister. "The movie was great," Serena replied. "Afterward, less so. Had a run-in with some racist group calling themselves Heritage Defenders." Venus's sharp intake of breath was audible. "Are you okay? Did you call the police?" "I'm fine. And no, I didn't file a report. It was just verbal confrontation." "Serena, I know. But making a police report would just give them the attention they want. Plus, I handled it." "Of course you did," Venus said, pride evident in her voice. "Still, be careful. These groups are getting bolder." "Trust me, I'm aware," Serena replied, glancing back at her laptop screen where Eric's face was frozen mid-argument. "But enough about that. How's London?" They talked for another 30 minutes. About Venus's preparations for Wimbledon, about Olympia's latest developmental milestone, about their mother's recovery from knee surgery. The conversation restored Serena's equilibrium, reminding her of the foundations that anchored her against life's storms. After hanging up, Serena returned to her research. The Heritage Defenders had an upcoming rally planned in Washington Square Park, just 10 blocks from her apartment. The event was titled "Reclaiming American Excellence" and featured several speakers, including Eric Whitman, identified as the Northeast Regional Director. Serena sat back, considering the implications. This wasn't just a random street encounter. It was part of an organized movement, gaining momentum. Rather than confronting the rally directly, they would create a positive alternative just 2 blocks away. A family-friendly event featuring diverse athletes sharing their stories, youth sports demonstrations, and an emphasis on how America's global sports dominance was directly linked to its diversity. The planning was intense and discreet. Serena reached out personally to several athlete friends across different sports, explaining the context without media involvement. The response was overwhelming. Dozens of athletes, coaches, and sports executives eager to participate. 4 days after the initial confrontation, as preparations were nearing completion, Serena received an unexpected email. The sender was Eric Whitman. Ms. Williams. Our encounter the other night was unplanned and unfortunate in its execution. I've since learned of your counter-event to our rally this weekend. While we fundamentally disagree on many issues, I'd like to propose a moderated debate between us rather than competing rallies. A civilized exchange of ideas seems preferable to what could become a tense public confrontation. If you're interested, please suggest a neutral venue and moderator. This could be an opportunity for both sides to be heard without the emotional overlay of competing street events. Respectfully, Eric Whitman, Regional Director, Heritage Defenders. Serena read the email twice, considering the implications. The offer was cleverly constructed, positioning Eric as reasonable while framing the alternative as potentially volatile. By suggesting a debate, he was elevating his status to her equal, creating false equivalence between his fringe ideology and her lived experience. She forwarded the email to Kim Wallace, asking for her assessment. Kim's response came within the hour. Classic legitimacy-seeking behavior. They want the visibility and perceived legitimacy that comes from debating someone of your stature. I'd advise against engagement on these terms. It serves their purposes more than yours. Serena agreed with the assessment, but saw a strategic opportunity. After consulting with her team, she crafted a response. Mr. Whitman, thank you for your email. I appreciate the sentiment behind offering a more structured dialogue. However, I don't believe a debate format serves either of our purposes effectively. Debates, by their nature, create an adversarial dynamic that emphasizes differences rather than understanding. Instead, I'd like to invite you to attend our Excellence Without Boundaries event as my guest. You would have no obligation to speak or participate, simply to observe. Following the event, I'd be open to a private conversation where we could exchange perspectives without the pressure of performing for an audience. My experience suggests that meaningful change happens through relationship, not rhetoric. If your interest is genuinely in understanding different viewpoints rather than public positioning, this approach might prove more productive for both of us. Serena Williams. The response was calculated. By declining the debate while offering a private alternative, Serena maintained control of the narrative while demonstrating confidence and openness. If Eric accepted, he would be attending her event on her terms. If he declined, his initial offer of dialogue would be revealed as performative. Eric's reply came the following morning. Ms. Williams, while I appreciate your counteroffer, attending your event would send the wrong message to our supporters. The fundamental values gap between our positions makes casual observation inappropriate. My offer of a structured debate remains open should you reconsider. Eric Whitman. Serena hadn't expected him to accept, but his response confirmed her suspicion that his interest was in public positioning rather than genuine dialogue. She didn't reply. As the weekend approached, both events gained attention. Local media had picked up on the planned Heritage Defenders rally, and word of Serena's counter-event spread rapidly through social media. The narrative was framing as a clash of visions, one exclusive, one inclusive. The morning of the events, Serena woke early, feeling the familiar pre-match tension she'd experienced hundreds of times throughout her career. The stakes were different, but the sensation was remarkably similar. Heightened awareness, focused energy, mental preparation for any contingency. As she dressed in a simple but elegant white pantsuit, a deliberate choice that projected both strength and optimism. Her phone rang. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar number with a local area code. Hello? Ms. Williams? This is Detective Rivera with NYPD. I'm calling about a potential security concern regarding your event today. Serena's pulse quickened. What kind of concern? We've been monitoring online activity related to both events scheduled in the village today. There's been some concerning chatter on channels associated with more extreme elements within the Heritage Defenders group. Nothing specific enough for us to act on, but enough that I wanted to make you aware. I appreciate the heads up, Detective. We have security arranged, but I'll alert them to be extra vigilant. After hanging up, Serena contacted her security team to relay the information. Their lead, a former FBI agent named Marcus, assured her they were prepared for any contingency. We've coordinated with NYPD, he explained. They'll have an enhanced presence in the area, though mostly plain clothes to avoid creating tension. By noon, Serena arrived at Washington Square Park's north side, where their event was being set up. The atmosphere was electric. Volunteers arranging chairs, setting up a small stage, establishing activity stations for children. Several athlete friends had already arrived, including Megan Rapinoe, Stephen Curry, and Simone Biles. "This is amazing, Serena," Megan said, embracing her. "Leave it to you to turn a confrontation into a celebration." "Just applying court strategy to real life," Serena replied with a smile. "Best defense is a good offense." From the south side of the park, the Heritage Defenders rally was beginning to form. Their crowd was smaller than anticipated, perhaps 100 people, mostly young white men with a sprinkling of older supporters. They carried professionally printed signs with slogans like "Merit Not Mandates" and "Defend American Excellence." Serena deliberately positioned herself so that she couldn't see their gathering. Today wasn't about them. It was about offering an alternative vision. By 1 p.m., the Excellence Without Boundaries event was in full swing. Over 500 people had gathered, Amrau's families with children, athletes of all ages, community members from across the city. The program alternated between short speeches from prominent athletes and interactive demonstrations where children could try different sports with professional guidance. When Serena took the stage for her brief remarks, the crowd's energy surged. She spoke not about the Heritage Defenders or their ideology, but about her own journey, the setbacks, the triumphs, the communities that had supported her along the way. "Excellence isn't exclusive," she concluded. "It's expansive. It grows when we remove barriers, not when we erect them. America's strength has always come from its ability to draw talent from everywhere, to create opportunity where none existed before. That's the tradition worth defending." The applause was thunderous. As Serena stepped down from the stage, she noticed increased activity at the south end of the stage.